Well, I'm going to present today a research that we are doing at BRT Plus Center of Excellence, and it's about the characterization of the COVID-19 influences on transportation in the Latin American context. I slightly changed the title because in the last week we added some of the Central North American countries, but in the part of Latin America. Well, for today, I'm going to give a brief introduction of the BRT Plus Center of Excellence. Then I'm going to introduce the investigation we are doing about COVID-19. I'm going to talk about general perceptions of people regarding COVID-19, what is happening with the travel, specifically by mode in the Latin American context. And at the end, briefly discussion about the work from home and what is happening with work from home in the Latin American context. I want to start with the BRT Plus Center of Excellence. And well, we are a center of excellence for bus rapid transit studies that is currently implemented and led in Santiago, in Chile, and is financed by the BRED Foundation. The director of the BRT is the Professor Ricardo Giesen. He is professor from the Católica Chile, and he is actively involved in the COVID-19 investigation that I'm going to present today. The BRT Plus Center of Excellence have many members. We are leading the process from the Católica de Chile, but there are also members in the United States, MIT. We also have members in the University of Sydney, University of Pretoria, and the World Resources Institute from mainly United States and Brazil. Now to introduce the COVID-19 and the influences of COVID-19 in transportation, I have to mention first that the COVID-19 influences have been studied in various contexts regarding transportation. We can find information about travel behavior and moral preferences, also risk perception of COVID-19, public transportation, and the different needs that public transportation have to cover to counteract the COVID-19 contagious, different influences of COVID-19 in mobility, accessibility, and also working from home, influenced by the COVID-19. Well, in this research, we mainly applied a questionnaire that was based on Beck and Henscher work. Beck and Henscher are researchers from University of Sydney, which is part of the BRT Plus Center of Excellence. That is the reason we based our work in their questionnaire. And we collected in 11 Latin American cities. And at the end, we collected more than 10,000 responses. These cities are part of different countries of Latin America, mainly Colombia, Argentina, Peru, Ecuador, Chile, Mexico, and Brazil. We collected the information in 2 different waves in all these cities. Actually, the first wave was on August to October 2020, and the second wave was from September to November this year. We just finished the data collection of the second wave. So today I am going to present the results in some cases about the 2 waves, and in other cases just about one of the 2 waves. Just to introduce you to the questionnaire at the beginning asked about travel characteristics and modal choices. Then we asked about different information about the job each response have, for example, the availability of working from home. We also asked about the COVID-19 influences, or sorry, the potential influences on the daily life. For example, how the COVID-19 changed the shopping behavior, how the COVID-19 changed the meeting with friends, going to restaurants. And we also ask about working from home questions. In this case, the working from home questions was also asked to those people that actually work during COVID-19. We also ask about attitudes and perceptions. And at the end of the questionnaire, we also ask about different socio-demographic information. When we talk about the COVID-19 general perceptions, I am going to first start with the COVID-19 perceptions on public transportation. So for this reason, I present in this part like the literature influences or the reported influences in the literature about the COVID-19 and public transportation. And one of the main findings was that the distance that was used, distance between people that was used to reduce the COVID-19 risk of contagion, may one of the reasons that generate a high reduction in the public transportation use. So we have two questions here. One of them is, this result could be explained by the risk perception, and the other one is how the government response to COVID-19 perception may influence this reduction in the public transportation use. To talk about the first of these questions, we asked to the people that let us know how they perceive the risk of COVID-19 in their health, their own health. In this case, we found that most of the people perceived a higher perception of risk. I'm going to apologize because of the colors. In this case, the blue ones are representing an extremely high risk, and the red ones are representing a low risk. So in this case, in the right side of this graphic, we found that most of the people perceived a high risk regarding their own health. There are different cities where this is not so true. For example, in Buenos Aires, Porto Alegre, Rio, and Sao Paulo. In these cases, the different responses are distributed similar in the part of low risk and in the part of high risk. There is an interesting thing here, and is regarding the three last cities, because these three cities, Porto Alegre, Rio, and Sao Paulo, are part of the same country, that is Brazil. And Brazil was a country that faced COVID in a different way than the other countries in this region. So that is a first interesting finding regarding that maybe the way that Brazil faced COVID may change the people's perception and the people's behavior against COVID. But there is another important thing here, and is when we ask it about the health of other people. I mean, we ask it about their own health in this case, but we also ask it about health of other people they know, or they maybe they know and they are not familiar with those people. And in that case, we found that there is a higher proportion of people that is perceiving a high risk when we ask it about health of other people. So that is also an interesting finding, because maybe the risk perception of COVID-19 is not perceived as highly as it is when we talk about ourselves. But when we talk about other people's, in that case, they also they perceive higher risk regarding COVID-19. In this case, Buenos Aires and Porto Alegre still have like a higher proportion of people that don't think the COVID-19 is a threat to the health of the general public. We also asked about the concern people have about the public transportation hygiene. And in this case, we found that regarding public transportation, there are a lot of concern when we talk about the hygiene of the public transportation. Again, in Buenos Aires, there is still like a higher proportion of people that doesn't think the hygiene in public transportation is a concern for them. But I have to mention something about Buenos Aires. In this case, this is information about wave one, and is that in Buenos Aires, in the period we collected the data, they doesn't permit to use public transportation. So maybe in this case, responses from Buenos Aires was made more like a declared response and not a stated response. So that may explain some of the differences we found in this case of public transportation concern regarding COVID-19. We also asked about how long people think that things are going to back to normal. This was asked in months. And we found different things here that are interesting. The first of all is mainly the shape of this collected data that seems like a Gauss response, where we found most of the people giving us our response that the situation may back to normal after 6 to 9 months. That means that in this moment, according to these responses, people was expecting that the things go back to normal, and that is not the case, at least not for many of the cities of the Latin American context. But there is another interesting finding, that is that there are a lot of people, actually in some of the cities, the higher proportion of people think that things are not going, will never be the same. So there are many people that are thinking that COVID-19 comes to change everything, and that we are not going to return to our normal situations before COVID-19, and that we are going to have like a new world regarding the urban mobility and regarding the different things in transportation. We also, as I mentioned before, we also asked about the perception of people related government response. And we found here also interesting things. And there is mainly a difference, highly difference between the Latin American context and the Brazilian cities. The Brazilian cities are the last ones, Belo Horizonte, Porto Alegre, Rio, and Sao Paulo, when we found a higher proportion of people that think that the government response to COVID-19 has been not appropriate for them. And in this case, I have to mention that, well, Brazil has another kind of government. And another thing is that Brazil doesn't restrict people as hard as other countries in the region. So that could be an explanation to these kind of responses, where we found that most of the people, or a higher proportion of the people in Brazil, think that the government doesn't act in an appropriate way. And when we asked about people how they think the other people response, most of them gave us a response about the people doesn't respond in an appropriate way. Again, here we have a difference in Buenos Aires. Remember, in this moment, Buenos Aires was in a complete lockdown. They were not able to use public transportation. The public transportation continued, but only for those that have to work, for example, in hospitals, and mainly primary kind of works. But in all the different cities, when we collected the data, we found that the people think that the people response has less appropriate than the government response. I mean, in this case, we can suggest that people doesn't trust in others to respond to COVID-19, at least for the wave 1 that was last year. When we talk about the travel by mode, we found different kind of information in the literature. For example, the literature reported a prone shift from the public transportation that was one of the most affected modes to active and private modes. Mainly that people try to change from public transportation to active or to private modes. However, the literature that I am presenting in this moment was based mainly on the global north cities and global north context, where the availability of private modes may be higher than the availability we found in the global south, where the research is based. When we talk about active and private modes, that was like the preferred modes to change from public transportation, we found two things here that I have to mention. The first one is that the bicycle, mainly the bicycle, has been considered as an excellent option to reduce the COVID-19 contagion risk. And the other one is that in different contexts, for example, in this case, the Australia context, we found an increase in the car use after easing the COVID-19 restrictions. In Australia, they started like a lockdown, and when they started to easing the COVID-19 restrictions, it has been reported an increase in the car use that is not similar in the different cities of Latin America when we collected responses. We asked people about their perception of the different changes in different modes. First of all, we asked about the perceived changes in the car use, when, as I previously mentioned, we found higher proportion of people that don't know or don't use the car. This could be explained by the non-availability of car for the most of the population in these cities. And we also found that the proportion of people that think that the use of car increase and that the use of car decrease is similar in some of the different cities, but in the Brazilian cases, we also found here a difference. It has been reported a perception of increase when we talk about the car use. As you see, these last 4 cities, the proportion of people that think that the car use increases is higher than the other options. When we asked about the perception in the public transportation use, in this case, we found in all the cities a similar response. That is that people perceive that public transportation use has decreased because of COVID-19. This is completely in line with the collected data, where we also reported a decrease in the number of trips using public transportation, but I am going to talk about that in a few more slides. When we ask about the perceived changes in bicycle use, we found an interesting thing, and is that most of the people don't know or don't use the bicycle, except for 3 cities, that is Bogota, Lima, and Quito. I have to mention 2 things here, and is that in this information, we don't have the responses from Mexico. And Ciudad de Mexico could be one of the cities with a higher proportion of bicycle use, but Bogota, regarding the cities I am presenting in this moment, Bogota has adopted the bicycle as a transportation mode, and the different public entities reported that in COVID-19, it has been an increase in the use of bicycles. So the people's perception, in the case of Bogota and also in Lima, that we found a similar result, we can explain that the perception is in line with the reported by the cities and the public entities in each of the cities. We found, like in, as I mentioned, Bogota, Lima, Buenos Aires, and Quito, were the cities where the bicycle use in the perception of the responses increases. And when we talk about perceived changes in walking, we also found these four cities, Bogota, Lima, Buenos Aires, and Quito, as the cities where people perceived higher rates of walking between people. Now, I am going to talk about the moral use, but not from the perceptions, but from the collected data. We asked people to let us know which of the different modes they usually use for commute. In this case, from the bottom to the top, you can find the information about private motorcycle, private car, non-share public transport, active modes, and pedestrian. The active modes is mainly bicycle and scooters, and we separated that information from pedestrian. And in white, you can find the work from home proportion. So that is the reason why in the before scenario, we have very low proportions of work from home. And that was one of the main findings. That is that in all cities, the proportion of work from home increases as in most of the cities of the world. So in this case, we also found a similar result for the Latin American context. But the other one is that the proportion of the different modes decrease, at least when we use the work from home also as a part of the entire trips. I am going to explain this in the next slide a little bit more, because when we do not consider work from home, we found that some of the proportions increase, considering that the different trips, the number of trips decrease also. But in this case, when we compare wave 1 that was last year with wave 2 that was this year, we found an interesting result in all of the Brazilian cities, and Bogota, Buenos Aires, and Santiago. That interesting result is that in these cities, when we compare wave 2 with wave 1, we found a lower proportion of people working from home. So in this case, we may think that Bogota, Buenos Aires, Santiago, and the cities of Brazil may be slowly returning to a normal situation. This is mentioned if we think that returning to normal means that the work from home is going to be reduced. So in this case, we found that for these cities, it's a reduction of the work from home proportion. And in Lima, Quito, Ciudad de Mexico, and Monterrey, we found between wave 1 and wave 2 an increase in the work from home proportion for these cities. So we may suggest that these four cities are in this moment like evolutioning in the COVID-19 process. When we talk about the number of trips, considering each of the modes, in this case, we found a reduction in the number of trips for all of the cities. However, if you see here, the blue one, the light blue, is the one that is representing the public transportation. And this public transportation number of trips is the most reduced between all of the different modes in almost all the cities. Why I mention this? Because if you found for the Brazilian cities, for example, Belo Horizonte, you may see that the Brazilian cities were the ones that reported a fewer reduce of public transportation use, but there is still a reduce. Another thing is that the car use has also been reduced when we compare before COVID with the wave 2 that was like 2 months ago, except for Rio, Sao Paulo, which were cities where the private car use has been reported similar before and in the wave 2. And when we talk about the active modes, we found a similar proportion in almost all the cities, not in all, but almost all the cities, between the before and the wave 2 scenarios. In this case, for the decrease of number of trips, when we reported the proportion of people using active modes, we can find that that proportion increased for wave 2 or increased for nowadays, mainly because the number of trips has been reduced, but not because the number of trips in that specific modes increases. There are cities where we present a reduction of use of bicycle. Mainly Quito and Santiago has been reduced, at least for this period. In this moment, in Santiago, there are a lot of campaigns trying to catch people to use more active modes. And to finish the presentation, I'm going to talk about the work from home and the different experiences working from home. This is going to be just an introduction of working from home. And first of all, I'm going to present how people perceive their productivity when they work from home. At the beginning, people mentioned that work from home may be more productive for people. However, when we asked that, we found that the higher proportion of people think that working from home is almost the same when we talk about productivity. And we also found in some of the cities, for example, in Porto Alegre, and in other cities like Sao Paulo, Santiago, Lima, and Quito, that there is a higher proportion of people thinking that is less productive, the work from home, in comparison with those that think that there are like more productive activities working from home. When we separate the work from home using an income perspective, at least for the wave 1, we found a relationship between the work from home and the income. This was a positive relationship. I mean, the higher the income, the higher the proportion of people working from home. However, this was found for the wave 1, and this was also reported in other studies for the year 2020. However, in a pilot study that we recently conducted in a medium-sized city of Colombia, we found that for this year, people from lower income context, like have a better preparation to increase the proportion of people that is able to work from home. So in this moment, maybe this finding is not the real result, but we are still doing research about that. So I expect that in the low income people, we can find a higher proportion of people that is able to work from home. This is my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and please let me know if you have any question.